Good afternoon and welcome to this press conference with Vice President Jourova and Commissioner Dalli, who will present to you the EU Anti-Racism Action Plan. You will find the action plan online and also the press material. It should all be available already by now. And without further ado, now I give the floor to you, Vice President.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Today I'm pleased to stand in front of you as my fellow Commissioner Helena Dalli and to tell you that we are stepping up our work to fight racism in the European Union. As President von der Leyen underlined to you, we know that progress to fight racism and hate in Europe is not good enough. We have reached a moment of reckoning. We have seen the anger culminate in global protests across the world, including in Europe. Not for the first time and likely not the last. But we hope with time and more effort we can change the tide in Europe. The action plan we are proposing contains concrete actions. First, legislation. Discrimination on the grounds of racial or ethnic origin is prohibited in the EU. We have a legal framework in place, a racial equality directive, legislation to combat hate speech, legislation to support employment equality, and legislation to protect the victims of crime. We will conduct a thorough fitness check if this framework is sufficient for today's reality, and we will very strictly enforce it. In this context, we will also propose a new law that will ensure that the equality bodies, which were established to protect us from discrimination, have clear roles, can efficiently play their role, and are independent. Second, we will improve our dialogue with members from the communities, and we will set up a new structure for coordination with stakeholders. We shall appoint for the first time an anti-racism coordinator who will closely liaise with people from minority groups and interact with our partners. And we will call a big anti-racism summit next year. We also need to look closer to home. This is my third point. Diversity in the Commission is not good enough. Diversity in the European institutions is not good enough. We will address it by adapting our recruiting policies to provide more opportunities in EU institutions. Lastly, as we recognize where we are, as European policymakers need to do more, we also want member states to do the same, with national action plans against racism and against racial discrimination. And we also want business to play their part and show leadership in driving diversity in the business sector. It's time we stopped talking about why we need to act. It's time to act. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Vice President. Commissioner Dalli, please.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I shall start by saying something which is maybe pretty obvious. Nobody is born racist. It is not a characteristic which we are born with. So it's a question of nurture and not nature. So this action plan, together with the legislation, which, as already mentioned, is already in place, is aimed to reverse this, to reverse what we have nurtured in our children, in our societies. We have to unlearn what we have learned. So I'm really thankful to the President for making the space, for creating the space for the adoption of this action plan, because we really have a lot of work to do. And I'm not saying that it is easy to unlearn to how to behave, how we have learned how to behave. So one of the biggest hurdles I see, and which we are addressing in this action plan, is that of stereotypes. For instance, we more or less all have a picture in our minds of what a delinquent looks like. But if you are a police officer, then this will create problems for others, as we have seen. Perception becomes reality because we act upon that perception. So that it is that perception of others which makes us racist. So that is why racism, we insist here, needs to be addressed in national curricula. We start with microaggression, with unconscious bias. If you see 2-year-olds, they haven't become racist yet, but once they become part of society, once they grow older, and they are in school, once they listen to what their parents and their friends are saying, they become racist. So the national curriculum is of the essence. We must start at the very root of the problem. I can say that concerns shared by European citizens, as represented by civil society and by MEPs, are reflected in this action plan. So we were very close, we were very connected to European Union societies when we were compiling this action plan, because it is about our citizens. So we listened to our citizens, and this is representative, this action plan, of what we learned from them. And this is an anti-racist plan, action plan. And I stress the word anti-racist, and it's in the title, EU Anti-Racism Plan, because saying that we are not racist is not enough. What are we doing about it? We have to be actively anti-racist and not just be complacent and say, whenever the discussion crops up, we say, I am not a racist. No, we must be anti-racist, not just not racist. And as Vice President Jourova pointed out, charity begins at home. So we must have greater diversity of employees in this institution, which will better reflect European diversity. So we are addressing this. And when we speak about racism, it's not something we think that is happening in our societies, or that we have a hunch about it. No, there are various studies also which point to the state of play. And in fact, as the Fundamental Rights Agency surveys show us, major discrepancies on grounds of racial and ethnic origin persist in the European Union, with racial and ethnic minorities reporting high levels of discrimination. And I would say again, this despite the good legislation that we have already in place. This is why this action plan contains a number of far-reaching measures intended to address the daily discriminations that racial and ethnic minorities experience, and also change our collective attitude from a passive one to an active one. So we need to collectively become anti-racist. We need a societal shift. We need to address microaggressions, like we need to address structural racism and discrimination. So the action plan makes clear that we do our utmost to ensure the full and correct implementation of existing legislation. And we will expand the legislation on equality bodies to ensure their independence and give them stronger tools for intervention. We need to ensure that policing is fair and no discriminatory profiling takes place. We also need to address underreporting of hate incidents and address security gaps. We will tackle the challenges posed by new technologies, such as those relative to artificial intelligence. We will also intervene in the different spheres of life, whether it is employment, education, health, housing, whatever. So in order to challenge structural racism and do our utmost to eliminate it, we will combat stereotypes and raise awareness about history. We will continue to gather data on the experience of discrimination on the grounds of racial and ethnic origin and expand our research base as necessary. We will support action at the national, regional, and local level. National action plans tackling racism and xenophobia are of the essence. I will therefore work with all member states to ensure that they all have one, that they all have an action plan. We will also support cities and municipalities and will launch an annual designation of European Capital of Inclusion and Diversity. We have set up a task force for equality to mainstream equality across all of the European Commission's outputs. We will recruit a coordinator for anti-racism and hold a summit against racism to coincide with the coming year's International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. We are, as I already mentioned, we are also taking an introspective look within the Commission services, and we will be working to ensure that our staff is reflective of society in its diversity. We will therefore introduce positive action measures to address current gaps. These are only some of the key measures contained in the action plan to deliver on our promise to leave no one behind. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner and Vice President. So we are now ready for a couple of questions. Quite some questions lining up here. Let me start with Vērena from DPA.
Yes, thank you for the question. I wanted to ask you about developments in Germany. There's a major debate going on about racist chat groups run by police people that have been detected recently. Since you're mentioning law enforcement, how should Germany address such a problem? And would this be a case of 4 infringements in the future? Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. Germany is one of the countries which wanted urgently to react on hate speech online. And it was in 2016 when the Minister Heiko Maas, those days Minister of Justice, explained to me that they have to go forward with pushing the platforms not to enable racism and hatred being distributed through the networks and platforms like Facebook and Google and other platforms. And the system in Germany is tougher than in the rest of the Union because there the platforms have to, they are fully responsible for the content and for what's happening in their systems under the sanction. So in Germany, there is a very short bridge between what the platforms are doing and how they are announcing these cases and the action, the following action from the law enforcement side and from the side of the prosecutors and courts. So in Germany there is a strong system, and of course for the member states it's a very strong call for action because such groups chatting and distributing the racist ideas and inciting hatred are intolerable, not only intolerable, but they are also illegal. So it's time to act.
Thank you. Then let me go to Moje from the Brussels Times.
Hello, thank you, Christian. Yes, I would like to ask a question both to Vice President Jourova and Commissioner Dalli. And I allow myself to refer to President von der Leyen's State of the Union speech this week, where she quoted the North Irish politician John Hume, who said that conflict is about difference, peace is about respect for difference. And she added that that the Commission will not propose to extend the list of EU crimes to all forms of hate crime and hate speech. So my question to both of you would be, you intend, for example, to criminalize such things as burning of books, of holy books, which are sacred for religious communities, which happened recently in Sweden, for example. And also because the President mentioned the anti-Semitic costumes paraded in streets, and she referred to the Carnival Als, if that could also in some way be, let's say, criminalized, such things. Thank you.
Helena, do you want to start?
Oh, well, I would say that anything which is not in line with European Union law will be investigated. So we we have the treaty, and we have our laws. So not abiding by those laws, any member state which doesn't, or any group which does not abide by those laws will be investigated, and then we shall see what needs to be done, depending on what the case is.
Yes, thank you very much. I will try to react on both the quote which you reminded us of from Ursula von der Leyen's speech. In this kind of policy, we work with two terms, diversity and equality. And these two terms are not in any kind of conflict or dichotomy, because we are fully recognizing we are different, it's the diversity, but where equality stands, we have to have equal rights in front of the law, and we have to have equal opportunities. So I think that this is also the philosophy which you can see in our action plan, and which we would like to see in the national plans against racism. I would like to see in the national plans more emphasis on giving the fair perspective for children and young people in Europe. But this is what you didn't ask about. On Eurocrime, of course, as already Helena spoke about it, there are two layers of the law in the EU. It's the EU legislation and the national legislation. When we speak about criminal law, it is still prevailing domain of the member states. Anytime we want to introduce new Eurocrimes, we need to have a very strong legal basis. We need to have a very strong justification why we are proposing new Eurocrime. We need to see pan-European problem, and we also need to see the will of the member states to accept it, because as I'm telling you, this is a sensitive field where we have shared competences, but more dominances on the member state level. To be concrete, at this moment, we have framework decision against racism and xenophobia on European level. I told you before that we are going to not only enforce properly, and we are now working on the scrutiny of how the member states are implementing this legislation, but we will also look at whether the text and whether this piece of legislation is still fit for purpose. And as we can see, it is the framework decision against racism and xenophobia, but not against other crimes targeted to different minorities. So, for instance, we do not have anything about the protection of, for instance, LGBTI people or some other minorities. And this is worth thinking about, whether this is the state we can be complacent with, whether we should not look into the possibility to increase the fight against hate crime and hate speech on European level. So, to answer your questions, yes, we are discussing now whether we should not start the debate with the member states and with the parliament about the possibility to increase or to enlarge the scope of the hate crime on the offense on the European level, and if so, we will introduce that already in the next year. This is the plan we are now discussing in the Commission, and I know it's not the topic of today's press conference, but also violence against women and hate crime against women. After the failure of Istanbul Convention, we will be also looking into the possibility of coming with the legislation on the European level. It will be the domain of Helena Dalli, who is intensively working on that.
Thank you. Jérôme Hughes had his hand lifted for a while.
Yes, thank you very much, Christian, for the opportunity. Obviously, Commissioners, a new action plan for the EU is very positive, but if I could broaden it out just a little bit, I mean, in terms of, you know, when we hear about the European Union, or sometimes rights groups would say the European Union fails to speak out more vociferously and not often enough in terms of the actions of its closest, traditionally its closest ally, the United States, particularly, for example, with regards to Donald Trump's Muslim ban on travel, and also, you know, his handling of the Black Lives Matter. So when the EU doesn't speak out more strongly against the United States, against Donald Trump on issues like this, is the EU somehow complicit?
I probably didn't catch the meaning of the question. Of course, we are following closely what's happening in the United States. The intensity of the protests is, of course, worth attention, not only for the politicians in the United States, including the president. We believe that the peaceful protests, which happen everywhere, which express the dissatisfaction with the level of the human rights, should be supported and heard well. But for the EU, I think the main task is to look at our domestic problems. We described before with Helena that we have plenty of work here, and we are focusing on them without interfering into how United States are solving their problems.
Thank you very much. You want to take
I was going to say, I think this is our way of being vociferous, of presenting work, of presenting an action plan for the European Union. And obviously the rest of the world is watching and listening. So for us, what is happening is not acceptable, but our remit is to work with our European Union citizens. But of course, we condemn what happens in whatever part of the world when what you have been mentioning happens.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Thomas Kutschka, FAZ.
Yes, thanks a lot. I actually have two questions. The first one, it appears that racial profiling is one of the most difficult issues when it comes to day-to-day racism. Is there anything that you can do from the EU level to counter that, and what exactly would it be? And the second question, of course, the anti-racism coordinator that you mentioned, do you already have a name in mind, and when would he or her or she be nominated? Thanks.
May I reply the second one?
No.
To give Helena the time to think over the first one. Of course, because she was very much involved in this issue of racial profiling, so you will get very highly qualified answer. On the first one, no, we don't have the name yet. But definitely it has to be a very strong personality with a high enough authority, because just imagine this is multi-sectoral issue. We speak about the need to mainstream the idea of anti-racism in all the policies we are doing at European Union level. It touches upon housing, education, jobs, the issue of poverty, culture, and health also. So a strong personality with very good horizontal knowledge of the problems, and also strong personality to have a big enough also natural authority for the communication with the member states, because we will want a lot of big things from the member states. That's why we need to have somebody very qualified and also very strong.
Okay, yes. Okay, so yes, racial profiling is one of the most difficult problems in this area of policy, as we have been seeing what has been happening in the United States and in European Union member states. And in fact, in my introduction, that's why I gave an example of the police and what do they have in their minds in terms of delinquency and who is the delinquent. And I purposefully chose that example because it's real and it's very, very worrying. And I have been discussing this with Commissioner Johansson on what we can do at the European Union level on this problem, and also we are seeing what we can do with member states, because we believe, and there is evidence to show this, that this is a major problem when we come to address anti-racism, because we all have our stereotypes in our minds, we all have our perceptions. But if you are a police officer, then that's a very big problem. If you are acting upon those perceptions, if you are acting upon those stereotypes. So we are looking very, very closely at this with other commissioners, especially Ylva Johansson, to see what can be done at the European Union level.
Okay, we will have to wrap up in the next few minutes, but as the midday briefing will start shortly, but I'll try to take 2 or 3 more questions max. Christoph has been asking the floor for a while. Christoph, we cannot hear you. Yeah. No, still not. There's something wrong with your microphone, I think. Okay, I'll try to come back to you in a moment, okay? We'll try with someone else. Samuel.
Great, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes. Great, good stuff. So I've got 2 questions. Firstly, statues and emblems of European colonialism and its regimes of oppression, discrimination and violence continue to be displayed across our contemporary urban environments. I'd like to know if this history of ours in Europe is fitting to the spirit of the action plan you are presenting today. And if not, would you support the removal of these statues from across Europe? And secondly, I'd like to ask a bit more about algorithmic bias in today's action plan. Could you tell us a bit more about any future EU measures that you foresee that could address or prevent algorithms being used for discrimination based on race? Thank you.
So if I may react on both, I will try to be brief. On the statues and the symbols, I strongly believe that it is for the people who live in each respective country to look critically in own history, even its dark chapters, and to take a decision how to approach the matter of statues and symbols. And I come from the country where we really would not like to see Stalin's statues. So I have an understanding for this. But it's for the people to decide. There should be a debate, and it should be the part of wider public discussion about the recent history of the society. On the algorithms, indeed, we already have in the ethical guidelines for AI the very strong call on not only human-centric approach, but also on the need to pay very strong attention and vigilance on not creating any kind of new kind of bias, technological discrimination. In other words, I always say that we have to proactively act against copy-pasting the imperfections and unfairness of the real world into the AI world. So this is in the ethical guidelines. We are now discussing the future legislation on AI. We will be focusing mainly on liability issue and product safety issue. But of course, we will not want to lose sight of this aspect of keeping and enhancing fundamental rights also in the parallel world of algorithms under AI or digital sphere.
Yes, with regards to statues, that is, we are insisting in this action plan on the curriculum, because it's good to have a critical debate, but we must engage children in school and teenagers in school about the various histories of the different member states in our union, and even question that. Many times history was written by the colonizer or by the victor. So we must challenge that in our schools, and in that way, when you see a monument, you will know what it is and who built it and what is behind it and what is its history. So I think we must have an intelligent, critical debate, but not only at this level of discussion, but at schools, because that is where the next generation is coming from. And if we have this understanding of these realities which we see around us, we are prepared, we are equipped to be able to challenge what we see. So I think that what is in this action plan is a good start to address that. And then, as Vice President said, it's for the member states, so that you will have a more informed citizenship in that member state, which will be able to be critical of the statutes which you make a reference there, and then put pressure on the governments to take action. With regards to algorithmic bias, yes, that's a very, very important issue. We speak about it also in the action plan, and no action plan on whatever subject would be relevant today if we don't go into these areas of policy.
Okay, so let's try again with Christoph, if it works by now.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, perfectly.
Thank you very much for the floor. So I will ask only one question to Commissioner Dalli. Yesterday, 2 days ago, President von der Leyen announced that the European Commission will put forward LGBTQI strategy, and she announced that she will push for mutual recognition of family relations in the EU. I don't know whether you are aware, but there was a lot of comments in Poland, in media, and from the MEPs that it might that the European Union might impose recognition of adoption by same-sex couple. And I was wondering whether you could explain that, what is behind those words, and I quote, if you are parent in one country, you are parent in every country. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you for that question. It's all about freedom of movement. If a family is recognized as such in France, they cannot move to another member state and not be recognized as a family. So that is what the president was saying, that a family is a family in whichever country, member state they decide to reside in or visit. So I think the president was very clear on this.
If I may add one totally legalistic comment. We already have case law on this in some of the decisions of the European Court of Justice. And it's a good tradition that after the strong case law, the Commission tries to catch up and come with the legislation. This legislation to come, in case we adopt it, and we will react on the words of Ursula von der Leyen, belongs to the international private law agenda, the family law, which requires unanimity for adoption by the member states. So it's more or less technical or legal comment, what is ahead of us, and we will start discussions soon.
Thank you, very clear. There's still a couple of hands raised, but I'm afraid for time reasons we will have to close here. But please feel free to get in touch with me and my team. We're happy to help you with any more questions that you might have. And let me mention, just to close, that the Vice President and the Commissioner will now, or very shortly, go on to a roundtable at the football stadium in Molenbeek, and we'll meet Bo Penza and Aline Sela and some other former football players from the Belgian national team. And this is open to press, so if you still want to, on the last minute note, join for, let's say, more practical discussion on racism, you're invited to that, and you can also find, we'll also find the stream of this event on EBS. Thank you very much for joining us.
You will not see us playing football, I guess. Thank you.
Now they're not coming.